right, welcome back, everybody. The Senate Democrats are one step closer to a $30 billion small business lending fund, and it's taken the help of two Republicans. Joining us right now is one of those Republicans, Senator George LeMieux, who is a member of the Commerce Committee and Oceans, Atmosphere, Fisheries, and Coast Guard Subcommittee. And, Senator, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't you talk to us a little bit about why you think this bill is important and what's been added to get us closer to getting this done?
Well, this is one of the few things that I thought that we could work together on with Republicans and Democrats. And that's because this is a bill that brings money to small banks to lend on main streets of the United States to the small businesses. It doesn't raise the deficit, doesn't raise the debt, doesn't increase taxes. And we know that as many as 40 to 45% of small businesses are having a very difficult time getting any kind of credit. And in my state of Florida, we have nearly 2 million small businesses. We are not a big business state. We don't have one Fortune 100 company headquartered in Florida. We'll get some someday, but we're not there yet. So this is really important for a state like Florida. I think it's going to be important across the country.
We just talked a little bit earlier about how there have been 103 bank foreclosures this year. That pace has picked up even from last year. Most of these are very small banks, community banks. Why the trouble in the community banks? And even if you give them money, I thought the real estate holdings that they held may prevent them from extending credit to businesses right now.
Well, only some of the banks are going to get this money. There's this CAMEL rating system, and only the top three, so the more credit-worthy banks are going to be able to get this lending. So it's not a bailout to banks who are having a problem on their balance sheet. It's supposed to be help for these banks to be able to lend the money. But you're right, the real estate asset base for small businesses in Florida and for the banks have put them into trouble because it gets the banks in trouble with the regulators because on their books they look like they've gone way down in value. It gets the businesses in Florida and other places in trouble as well because they've lent against a lot of times the building that they own, and that building now is underwater, so they get themselves technically in default on a loan. So getting a little more credit in the pump and priming the pump with this credit, I think, is going to help.
Will this credit definitely go on to small businesses, or is this a situation where the banks can hold on to it to recapitalize and make sure that they're okay for the loans they already have on the books?
Well, it should go to them, and if they don't lend the money in a 2-year period, their yield rate that they have to pay the government back goes up. So there's a disincentive to just hold it on your books.
A lot of the talk over the weekend, I'm sure you're hearing in Washington, is the Bush tax cuts, what to do, how they're going to play it. No one wants to, I guess, even the Democrats wouldn't like to raise, to let the tax cuts expire on people that make less than $250,000. But Secretary Geithner said that it should happen for the wealthy, for those that make over $250,000. And I always hear arguments. The people on the right say it will hurt small businesses because so many small businesses are in that higher tax bracket. Then I hear people on the other side say that represents a handful of small businesses that actually file that way or that are in that $250,000 and above income range. And we need some clarity to know how many businesses file that. Will it hurt small businesses?
Well, it's definitely going to hurt small businesses.
How many are there?
The report I saw over the weekend is that 1/3 of the filers who would fall under the top tax rate are small businesses. So that makes no sense at all that we would increase taxes in the time of a recession on the people who create 65% of the jobs in this country, who are the people we need to be helping, not hurting. We don't have a taxing problem in Washington. We've got a spending problem in Washington. You saw, and I know your guest talked about earlier, that we're at $1.5 trillion deficit projected for 2011. That follows 2010 and 2009. Our spending is 25% of GDP. That's the same level it was during World War II and was never at that level in between now and back then. Our debt is at $13 trillion. That's 100% of GDP. I mean, to think about the fact that our debt equals all of the work done by every American in producing a good or service within a year's time is staggering. Since I came to the Senate, I was appointed a year ago. The national debt's gone up $1 trillion. It took us 200 years to go our first $1 trillion in debt. So what I want to see is us to go back and start capping our spending at a level that makes sense. Maybe go back to 2007 as a proposal I have.
You've seen if you don't let the Bush tax cuts expire, you've seen how that's going to widen the deficit even more.
Well, I'm a believer that tax cuts actually create revenues because when you put more money back into small businesses and people's pockets, they go back out in the world, they invest it, they create jobs. and they buoy the economy. So, look, should we evaluate our tax system and try to make it simpler, fairer, easier to understand, and more predictable? Sure, we should. But should we just, at this point, not extend those tax cuts? That doesn't make sense to me.
But over time, with a budget deficit, $1.5 trillion, 10% of GDP, I think everybody will agree we have to control and cut government spending. But the gap is so large that at some point down the line, we'll have also to raise revenues. Isn't it the case we should be honest with the American public, not just the rich, even the middle class, and say at some point your taxes will have to go up? Is there any other way we can cut this budget deficit to something sustainable? Can we have 10% of GDP spending cuts? I don't think that's realistic. So let's be honest with the American people. All of us will have probably to pay taxes down the line, more than we do right now.
Well, the honest comparison that I would do is let's go back to 2007. 2007 was the last year of the boom. We didn't go into the recession until December of that year. If we went back to our 2007 level of spending, by 2013 we would balance the budget. By 2020 we would cut the debt in half. Instead of being $25 trillion, it'd be $6. And Virginia just did this. Virginia, under their new governor, went back and said, let's cap spending at 2006 levels. And instead of having a deficit, they now have a surplus. It can be done.
Senator, why don't we ask you while you hear about the oil spill? We're hearing that BP CEO Tony Hayward could be out as early as today. How's the situation going right now in the Gulf? How is it affecting Florida?
Well, there is some good news with the capping of the spill. We're not seeing the oil coming up on the beaches in Florida. So I want to say to everybody who's watching your show, great time to take a vacation on a Florida beach.
None of those beaches are being affected right now?
The beaches now are clean. The oil has come up off the shore. It actually did it in advance of the capping, but the capping has certainly helped. But those businesses are still hurting. We think that they've lost $1 billion in Northwest Florida, and we need to make sure that they get the payments out of this $20 billion fund on a regular and consistent basis so that they can make it through the summer. Their time to make their money is between Memorial Day and Labor Day. So we're working to make sure they get those dollars.
Are bookings back, even though you say the oil is not on the beaches right now?
The bookings are not back. So that's why folks need to know that this is a time to come and visit. I see the president's going to take a vacation down there. I'd invite all Americans to take a vacation in Florida this summer.
All right, Senator, thank you for joining us on Set this morning.
Thanks for having me.
When we return.